Hey, what's up? I'm reading. I'm reading The Mind's Eye. It's called The Mind's Eye. That's a book. Who's the author? There are two authors actually. They are Douglas R. Hofstadter and Daniel C. Dennett. It's supposed to be well. The the complete name is The Mind's Eye: Fantasies and Reflections on Self and Soul. It's a collection of essays and other texts about the nature of mind and the self. Ooh, all right. Originally published in 1981. Yeah. Yeah, I came across this way back. I don't know, some a year back or something, and then recently I've been trying to do a lot of deviant thoughts videos on the dead blood cells, and I just recalled this book, The Mind's Eye, collection of essays about the mind, which is what the the deviant thoughts which was going to be about. So I thought, why not read the mind side to get some more ideas for deviant thoughts as well. So here we are. Yeah, yeah, this video is for you. I was just looking at thumbnail for the benefits of midbrain activation. There are five arrows and there's a mind, the exploding mind. Anger's at 254 views all of a sudden. How? Was that 246 to 47 last I checked yesterday? I don't know how the views just rocketed all of a sudden. Toyota Fortuner has come to 102 views. It's all in the thumbnails, man. Have catchy thumbnails and you will attract crowds. Alright, why talk about that now? Let's start reading The Mind's Eye. Alright, the first chapter is called Introduction. You see the moon rise in the east. You see the moon rise in the west. You watch two moons moving toward each other across the cold black sky, one soon to pass behind the other as they continue on their way. You are on Mars, millions of miles from home, protected from the killing frostless cold of the red Martian desert by fragile membranes of terrestrial technology. Protected but stranded, for your spaceship has broken down beyond repair. You will never again return to Earth, to the friends and family and places you left behind. But but perhaps there is hope in the communication compartment of the disabled craft. You find a Telecon Mark IV teleporter and instructions for its use. If you turn the teleporter on, tunes. Oh, there's a lot of typos in the book. By the way, it's the book is at themindeye.blogspot.com. Oh yeah, there are some typos already. Anyway, returning back to the book. If you turn the teleporter, where is it? Man, what has become of my vision? If you turn the teleporter on to tune its beam to the telecom receiver on Earth and then step into the sending chamber, the teleporter will swiftly and painlessly dismantle your body, producing a molecule by molecule blueprint to be beamed to Earth, where the receiver, its reservoir is well stocked with the requisite atoms, will almost instantaneously produce from the beam instructions you whisked back to Earth at the speed of light into the arms of your loved ones, who will soon be listening with rapt attention to your tales of adventures on Mars. One last survey of the damaged spaceship convinces you that the Telcon is your only hope. With nothing to lose, you set the transmitter up, flip the right switches, and step into the chamber. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, flash! You open the door in front of you and step out of the telecom receiver chamber into the sunny, familiar atmosphere of Earth. You've come home none the worse for fear after your long distance telecom walk from Mars. Your narrow escape from a terrible fate on the red planet calls for a celebration, and as your family and friends gather around you, notice how everyone has changed since you last saw them. It's been almost 3 years after all, and you've grown older. Look at Sarah, your daughter, who must now be 8.5. You find yourself thinking, can this be the little girl who used to sit on my lap? Of course it is, you reflect, even though you must admit that you do not so much recognize her as extrapolate from memory and deduce her identity. She's so much taller, looks so much older, and knows so much more. In fact, most of the cells in her body were not there when you last cast eyes on her. But in spite of growth and change, in spite of replacement cells, she's still the same little person you kissed goodbye 3 years ago. Then it hits you. Am I really the same person who kissed this little girl goodbye 3 years ago? Am I this 8-year-old child's mother, or am I actually a brand new human being, only several hours old, in spite of my memories or apparent memories of days and years before that? Did this child's mother recently die on Mars, dismantled and destroyed in the chamber of a Telecon Mark IV? Did I, did I die on Mars? No, certainly I did not die on Mars, since I'm alive on Earth. Perhaps, though, someone died on Mars, Sarah's mother. Then I'm not Sarah's mother. But I must be. The whole point of getting into the telecon was to return home to my family. But I keep forgetting. Maybe I never got into that telecon on Mars. Maybe that was someone else, if it ever happened at all. Is that infernal machine a teleporter, a mode of transportation, or, as the brand name suggests, a sort of murdering twin maker? Did Sarah's mother survive the experience with the telecon or not? She thought she was going to. She entered the chamber with hope and anticipation, not suicidal resignation. Her act was altruistic, to be sure. She was taking steps to provide Sarah with the loved one to protect her, but also selfish. She was getting herself out of the jam into something pleasant, or so it seemed. How do I know that that's how it seemed? Because I was there. I was Sarah's mother thinking those thoughts. I am Sarah's mother, or so it seems. In the days that follow, your spirits soar and plummet, the moments of relief and joy balanced by gnawing doubts and soul searching. Soul searching. Perhaps you think it isn't right to go along with Sarah's joyous assumption that her mother's come home. You feel a little bit like an imposter and wonder what Sarah will think when someday she figures out what really happened on Mars. Remember when she figured out about Santa Claus and seemed so confused and hurt? How could her own mother have deceived her all those years? Now it's with more than idle intellectual curiosity that you pick up. Damn, man, this is so good already. Unlike that stupid Kama Sutra book. Oh, I need to get over that. Video output low. What does it mean? Viewers will experience buffering. Why is my internet speed not high enough? I don't know. We'll see that later and correct it for the next part if something's actually wrong. Anyway, this copy of the Mind's Eye and begin to read it, for it promises to lead you on a voyage of discovery of the self and the soul. You will learn, it says, something about what and who you are. You think to yourself, here I am reading page 5 of this book. I see my hands holding this book. I have hands. How do I know they're my hands? Silly question. Hey, they're fastened to my arms, to my body. How do I know this is my body? I control it. Do I own it? In a sense, I do. It's mine to do with it as I like, so long as I don't harm others. It's even a sort of legal possession, for while I may not legally sell it to anyone, so long as I'm alive, I can legally transfer ownership of my body to, say, a medical school once it's dead. If I have this body, then I guess I'm something other than this body. When I say I own my body, I don't mean this body owns itself, probably a meaningless claim. But does everything that no one else owns own itself? Or does everything that no one else owns own itself? Does the moon belong to everyone, to no one, or to itself? What can be an owner of anything? I can, and my body is just one of the things I own. In any case, I and my body seem both intimately connected and yet distinct. I am the controller, it is the control, most of the time. Then the Mind's Eye asks you if, in that case, you might exchange your body for another, a stronger or more beautiful or more controllable body. You think that this is impossible. But the book insists it's perfectly imaginable and hence possible in principle. You wonder whether the book has in mind reincarnation of the transmigration of souls, but Anticipating the wonder, the book acknowledges that while reincarnation is one interesting idea, the details of how this might happen are always left in the dark, and there are other more interesting ways it might happen. What if your brain were to be transplanted into a new body which it could then control? Wouldn't you think of that as switching bodies? That would be vast. There would be vast technical problems, of course, but given our purposes, we can ignore them. It does seem then that if your brain were transplanted into another body, you would go with it. But are you a brain? Try in two sentences and see which one sounds more like the truth to you. I have a brain. I am a brain. Sometimes we talk about smart people being brains, but we don't mean it literally. We mean they have good brains. You have a good brain, but who or what then is the you that has the brain? Once again, if you have a brain, could you trade it in for another? How could anyone detach you from your brain in a brain switch if you always go with your brain in a body switch? Impossible? Maybe not as we should see. After all, if you have recently returned from Mars, you left your old brain behind, didn't you? So suppose we agree that you have a brain. Have you ever stopped to ask yourself how you know you have a brain? You've never seen it, have you? You can't see it even in a mirror and you can't feel it. But of course you do know you have a brain. You know it because you know that you're a human being and all human beings have brains. You've read it in books and have been told it by people you trust. All people have livers too, and strangely enough, what you know about your own brain is rather like what you know about your own liver. You trust what you've read in books. For many centuries, people didn't know what their livers were for. It took science to discover the answer. People haven't always known what their brains were for either. Aristotle is said to have thought that the brain was an organ for cooling the blood. And of course, it does cool your blood quite efficiently in the course of its operations. Suppose our livers had been in our skulls and our brains were snuggled into our rib cages. As we looked out the world and listened, do you think we might have found it plausible that we thought with our livers? Your thinking seems to happen behind your eyes and between your ears, but that's because where your brain is. Or is that because you locate yourself roughly at the place you see from? Isn't it, in fact, just as mind-boggling to try and imagine how we can think with our brains, those soft grayish cauliflower-shaped things, as to imagine how we could think with our livers, those soft reddish-brown liver-shaped things? The idea that what you are is simply not a living body or a living brain, but also a soul or spirit seems to many people to be unscientific in spite of its ancient tradition. Souls, they might want to say, have no place in science and could never fit into the scientific worldview. Science teaches us that there are no such thing as souls. We don't believe in leprechauns and ghosts anymore, thanks to science. And this aspect idea of a soul inhabiting a body, the ghost in the machine will itself soon give up the ghost. I just want to do a quick. What's a leprechaun again? A small mischievous sprite elf. Alright. But not all versions of the idea that you're something distinct from your purely physical body are so vulnerable to ridicule and refutation. Some versions, as we shall see, actually flourish in the garden of science. Our world is filled with things that are neither mysterious and ghostly nor simply constructed out of the building blocks of physics. Do you believe in voices? How about haircuts? Are there such things? What are they? What, in the language of the physicist, is a hole? Not an exotic black hole, but just a hole in a piece of cheese, for instance. Is it a physical thing? What is a symphony? Where in space and time does the Star-Spangled Banner exist? Is it nothing but some ink trails on some paper in the Library of Congress? Destroy that paper and the anthem will still exist. Latin still exists, but there's no longer a living language. The language of the cave people of France no longer exists at all. The game of bridge is less than 100 years old. What sort of thing is it? If it's not an animal, vegetable, or mineral. These things are not physical objects with mass or a chemical composition, but are not purely abstract objects either. Objects like the number pi, which is immutable and cannot be located in space and time. These things have birthplaces and histories. They can change and things can happen to them. They can move about much the same way as species, a disease, or an epidemic can. We must not suppose that science teaches us that everything anyone would ever want to take seriously is identifiable as a collection of particles moving about in space and time. Some people may think it's just common sense or good scientific thinking to suppose you are nothing but a particular living being, physical organism, a moving around of atoms. But in fact, this idea exhibits a lack of scientific imagination, not hard-headed sophistication. One doesn't have to believe in ghosts to believe in selves that have an identity that transcends any particular living body. You're Sarah's mother after all. But is Sarah's mother you? Did she die on Mars or was she moved back to Earth? It seems to you she returned to Earth, and of course it seemed to her before she stepped into the teleporter that she would return to Earth. Was she right? Maybe, but what would you say about the results of using the new improved Telecon Mark 5? Thanks to the miracles of non-invasive CAT scanning techniques, it obtains its blueprint without destroying the original. Sarah's mother might still decide to push the button and step into the chamber for Sarah's sake and in order to get the full story of her tragedy back to Earth, in the words of Nella, one spokeswoman. But would she also expect to step out of the chamber and find herself still on Mars? Could someone literally be in two places at once? Not for long in any case, but soon the two would accumulate different memories and different lives. They would be as distinct as any two people could be. Holy moly, this is so interesting. These are the exact sort of thoughts I started to get in 12th, 11th, not 11th, yeah, 11th and 12th, even in engineering. Man, this is amazing mind fucking introspection session. This is amazing. This is amazing. This is the book I'm gonna keep reading from now. But it's the stream running. Yeah, the stream's running. All right, let's continue. Let's finish the introduction of this book. By the way, how does the psychedelic pattern being going? All right, I know no one's watching, but still, if someone watches this in the future, they can answer this question to themselves or to me, to the future me, which I'm gonna read in the comments and reply in case they do read it. Anyway, private lives. What makes you you, and what are your boundaries? Part of the answer seems obvious. You're a center of consciousness. But what in the world is consciousness? Consciousness is both the most obvious and the most mysterious feature of our minds. On the one hand, what could be more certain or manifest to each of us that he or she is a subject of experience, an enjoyer of perceptions and sensations, a sufferer of pain, and an entertainer of ideas, and a conscious deliberator? On the other hand, what in the world can a consciousness be? How can living physical bodies in the physical world produce such a phenomenon? Science has revealed the secrets of many initially mysterious natural phenomena. Magnetism, or photosynthesis, or digestion are in principle equally accessible to any observer with the right apparatus, but any particular case of consciousness seems to have a favored or a privileged observer whose access of any others, no matter what the apparatus they may have. For this reason and others, so far there's no good theory of consciousness. There's not even agreement about what a theory of consciousness would be like. Some have gone so far as to not deny that there's any real thing for the term consciousness to name. The mere fact that such a familiar feature of our lives has resisted for so long all attempts to characterize it suggests that our conception of it is at fault. What is needed is not just more evidence, more experimental and clinical data, but a careful rethinking of the assumptions that lead us to suppose there is a single and familiar phenomenon, consciousness, answering to all the descriptions licensed by our everyday sense of the term. Consider the baffling questions that are inevitably raised whenever one turns one's attention to consciousness. Are other animals conscious? Are they conscious in the same way we are? Could a computer or a robot be conscious? Can a person have unconscious thoughts, unconscious pains or sensations or perceptions? Is a baby conscious at or before birth? Are we conscious when we dream? Might a human being harbor more than one conscious subject or ego or agent within one brain? Good answers to these questions certainly will depend heavily on empirical discoveries about the behavioral capacities and internal circumstances of the various problematic candidates for consciousness. But about every such empirical finding, we can ask, what is its bearing on the question of consciousness and why? These are not directly empirical questions, but rather conceptual ones, which we may be able to answer with the help of thought experiments. Our ordinary concept of consciousness seems to be anchored to two separate sets of considerations that can be captured roughly by the phrases from the inside and from the outside. From the inside, our consciousness seems obvious and pervasive. We know that much goes on around us and even inside our bodies of which we are entirely unaware or unconscious. But nothing could be more intimately known to us than those things of which we are individually conscious. Those things of which I'm conscious and the ways in which I'm conscious of them determine what it is like to be me. I know in a way no other could know what it is like to be me. From the inside, consciousness seems to be an all or nothing phenomenon, an inner light that's either on or off. We grant that we are sometimes drowsy or inattentive or asleep, and on occasion we even enjoy abnormally heightened consciousness, but When we are conscious, that we are conscious is not a fact that admits of decrease. There is a perspective then from which consciousness seems to be a feature that sunders the universe into two strikingly different kinds of things: those that have it and those that don't. Those that have it are subjects, beings to whom can be one way or another. Beings, it is like something to be. It's not like anything at all to be a brick or a pocket calculator and or an apple. These things have insights, but not the right sorts of insights. No inner life, no point of view. It is certainly like something to be me, something I know from the inside, and almost certainly like something to be you. For you have told me most convincingly that it's the same with you, and probably like something to be with something to be a dog or a dolphin, if only they could tell us, and maybe even something like to be a spider. Fucking hell, this is amazing. This brings me so much happiness. Other minds. When one considers these others, other folk and other creatures, one considers them perforce from the outside, and then various of their observable features strike us relevant to the question of their consciousness. Creatures react appropriately to events within the scope of their senses. They recognize things, avoid painful experiences, learn, plan, and solve problems. They exhibit intelligence, but putting matter this way might be held to prejudge the issue. Talking of their senses or painful circumstance. I'm so sorry. It was something in my nose. But putting matter this way might be held to prejudge the issue. Talking of their senses or painful circumstances, for instance, suggests that we have already settled the issue of consciousness. Note that had we described a robot in these terms, the polemic intent of the choice of words would have been obvious. How would creatures differ from robots, real or imagined? By being organically and biologically similar to us, and we are the paradigmatic conscious creatures. This similarly admits of degrees, and of course, one's intuitions about what sorts of similarity count are probably untrustworthy. Dolphins' fishiness subtracts from our conviction that they're conscious like us, but no doubt should not. Were chimpanzees as dull as sea slugs, their facial similarity would, as no doubt, nevertheless favor their inclusion in the charm circle. If houseflies were about our size or warm-blooded, we'd be much more confident that when we plucked off their wings, they felt pain, our sort of pain, the kind that matters. What makes us think that some such considerations ought to be count and not others? The obvious answer is that the various outside indicators are more or less reliable signs or symptoms of the presence of that whatever it is conscious subject knows from the inside. But how could this be confirmed? This is the notorious problem of other minds. In one's own case, it seems one can directly observe the coincidence of one's inner life with one's outwardly observable behavior. But if each of us is to advance rigorously beyond solipsism, okay, new word, what is solipsism? The view or theory that the self is all that can be known to exist. Self-centeredness. Oh, okay, solipsism, nice. Where is solipsism again? Yeah. But if each of us is to advance rigorously beyond solipsism, we must be able to do something apparently impossible, confirm the coincidence of inner and outer in others. They're telling us of the coincidence in their own cases will not do officially, for that gives us more coincidence of outer with outer. The demonstrable capacities for perception and intelligent action normally go hand in hand with the capacity to talk, and particularly to make introspective reports. If a cleverly designed robot could seem to tell us of its inner life, could utter all the appropriate noises in the appropriate context, would we be right to admit it to the charm circle? We might be, but how could we ever tell if we were not being fooled? Here the question seems to be, is that special inner light really turned on, or is there nothing but darkness inside? And this question looks unanswerable, so perhaps we have taken a misstep already. My use of we and are in the last few paragraphs and your unworried acceptance of it reveals that we don't take the problem of other minds seriously, at least for ourselves and the human beings with whom we normally associate. It's tempting to conclude that insofar there is a serious question yet to be answered about the imagined robot. It must turn out to be answerable by straightforward observation. Some theorists think that once we have better theories of organization of our brains and their role in controlling our behavior, we might be able to use those theories to distinguish conscious entities from non-conscious entities. This is to suppose that somehow or other the facts we get individually from the inside reduce the facts publicly obtainable from the outside. Enough of the right sort of outside facts will settle the question of whether or not some creature is conscious. For instance, consider neurophysiologist E.R. Johns' recent attempt to define consciousness in objective terms. He defined it like this: a process in which information about multiple individual modalities of sensation and perception is combined into a unified multidimensional representation of the state of the system and its environment, and integrated with information about memories and the needs of the organism, generating emotional reactions and programs of behavior to adjust the organism to its environment. Alright, so it's just saying that the multiple modalities of sensation are eventually linked to one single state. Determining that this hypothetical internal process occurs in a particular organism is presumably a difficult but empirical task in the province of a new science of neural information processing. Suppose that with regard to some creature it were completed successfully. The creature is by this account conscious. If you have understood the proposal correctly, you will not find any room to wonder further. Reserving judgment here would be like being shown in detail the operations of an automobile engine and then asking, but is it really an internal combustion engine? Might we not be deluded in thinking it was? Any proper scientific account of the phenomenon of consciousness must inevitably take this somewhat doctrinaire step of demanding that the phenomenon be viewed as objectively as accessible, but one may still wonder if, once the step is taken, the truly mysterious phenomenon will still be left behind. Before dismissing this skeptical hunch as the fancy of romantics, it would be wise to consider a striking revolution in the recent history of thinking about the mind, a revolution with unsettling consequences. Freud's crutch. For John Locke and many subsequent thinkers, nothing was more essential to the mind than consciousness, and particularly self-consciousness. The mind in all its activities and processes was viewed as transparent to itself. Nothing was hidden from its inner view. To discern what went on in one's mind, one just looked and introspected. And the limits of what one thereby found were the very boundaries of the mind. The notion of the unconscious thinking or perceiving was not entertained, or if it was dismissed as incoherent, self-contradictory nonsense. For Locke, indeed, there was a serious problem of how to describe all one's memories as being continuously in one's mind when yet they were not continuously present to consciousness. The influence of this view has been so great that when Freud initially hypothesized the existence of unconscious mental processes, his proposal met widely with stark denial and incomprehension. It was not just an outrage to common sense, it was even self-contradictory to assert that there could be unconscious beliefs and desires, unconscious feelings of hatred, unconscious schemes of self-defense and retaliation. But Freud won converts. This conceptual impossibility became respectably thinkable by theorists once they saw that it permitted them to explain otherwise inexplicable patterns of psychopathology. The new way of thinking was supported by a crutch. One could cling to at least a pale version of the Lockean creed by imagining that these unconscious thoughts, desires, and schemes belong to other selves within the psyche. Just as I can keep my scheme secret from you, my ID can keep secrets from my ego. By splitting the subject into many subjects, one could preserve the axiom that every mental state must be someone's conscious mental state and explain the inaccessibility of some of these states to their putative owners by postulating other interior owners for them. This move was usefully obscured in the mists of jargon so that the weird question of whether it was like anything to be a superego, for instance, could be kept at bay. Sigmund Freud, I don't know how it's pronounced, I need to look that up, but I'll do that later. Freud seems good. Freud's expansion of the bounds of the thinkable revolutionized clinical psychology. It also paved the way for the more recent development of cognitive experimental psychology. We have come to accept without the slightest twinge of incomprehension a host of claims to the effect that sophisticated hypothesis testing, memory searching, inference, in short, information processing occurs within us, though it's entirely inaccessible to introspection. It's not repressed unconscious activity of the sort Freud uncover activity driven out of the side of consciousness, but just mental activity that is somehow beneath the ken of consciousness altogether. Freud claimed that his theories and clinical observations gave him the authority to overrule the sincere denials of his patients about what was going on in their minds. Similarly, the cognitive psychologist marshals experimental evidence, models, and theories to show that people are engaged in surprisingly sophisticated reasoning processes of which they can give no introspective account at all. Not only are minds accessible to others, some mental activities are more accessible to outsiders than to the very owners of those minds. In the new theorizing, however, the crutch has been thrown away. Oh man, I got 30 new messages on Telegram. How come you're awake? Just reach home. What? Meet up now. Go outside. Breakfast did. I got work to do in the morning for NOC. So you sleep now, huh? Pussy. Have to go as early as possible to RT1 and get shit done, or I won't sleep till even. Array, ASAP in 11, not 9 am. When you come out, Harris house, Macha, okay, come on 6, come here, we make Maggie. I have Maggie here and sexy Wi-Fi and a bed. Morning, I'm going out. What should I tell parents? Tell you go for fresh air or play with friends. Let's see. I'll come if I don't fall asleep. I didn't sleep at all in the bus. Okay, I call at 6:30. We eat puri. All right. What you guys? You guys are having a good time without me. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Of course. There's still quite a bit. Oh, not that much. All right. Although the new theories, it's only been 30 minutes, so it's fine. Although the new theories are abound with metaphors, subsystems like little people in the brain sending messages back and forth, asking for help, obeying, and volunteering, the actual subsystems are deemed to be unproblematic, non-conscious bits of organic machinery as utterly lacking in a point of view or inner life as a kidney or a kneecap. Certainly, the advent of mindless but intelligent computers played a major role in further dissolution of the Lockean view. But now Locke, I don't know, I think it's just Locke. But now Locke's extremism has been turned on its head. If before the very idea of unconscious mentality seemed incomprehensible, now we are losing our grip on the very idea of conscious mentality. What is consciousness but, if perfectly unconscious, indeed subjectless information processing, is in principle capable of achieving all the ends for which conscious minds were supposed to exist? If theories of cognitive psychology can be true of us, they could also be true of zombies or robots, and the theories seem to have no way of distinguishing us. How could any amount of mere subjectless information processing of the sort we have recently discovered to go on in us add up to that special feature with which it's so vividly contrasted? For the contrast has not disappeared. The psychologist Carl Lashley once suggested provocatively that no activity of the mind is ever conscious, by which he meant to draw our attention to the inaccessibility of the processing that we know must go on when we think. He gave an example. If asked to think a thought in dactylic hexameter, those who knew which rhythm that is can readily oblige. For instance, how in the world did this case of dactylic hexameter come to me? How do we do it? What goes on in us to produce such a thought is something quite inaccessible to us. Lashley's remark might seem at first to herald the demise of consciousness as a phenomenon for psychological study, but its true effect is just the opposite. It draws our attention unmistakably to the difference between all the unconscious information processing, without which, no doubt, there could be no conscious experience, and the conscious thought itself, which is somehow directly accessible. Accessible to what or whom? To say that it's accessible to some subsystem of the brain is not yet to distinguish it from the unconscious activities and events which are also accessible to various subsystems of the brain. If some particular special subsystem is also constituted, if some particular special subsystem is so constituted that its traffic with the rest of the system somehow makes it the case that there is one more self in the world, one more thing it is like to be. This is far from obvious. Strangely enough, this problem is the old chestnut, the problem of other minds, resurrected as a serious problem that now that cognitive science has begun to analyze the human mind into its functional components. This comes out most graphically in the famous split brain cases. Split brain, what is that? There is nothing very problematic in granting that the people who have undergone severing of the corpus callosum have two somewhat independent minds, one associated with the dominant brain hemisphere and another associated with the non-dominant brain hemisphere. This is not problematic, for we have grown used to thinking of a person's mind as an organization of communicating subminds. Here the lines of communication have simply been cut, revealing the independent character of each part particularly vividly. But what remains problematic is whether both subminds have an inner life. One view is that there is no reason to grant consciousness to the non-dominant hemisphere, since all that has been shown is that hemisphere, like many unconscious cognitive subsystems, can process a lot of information and intelligently control some behavior. But then we may ask what reason there is to grant consciousness to the dominant hemisphere, or even to the whole intact system in a normal person. We had this thought this question frivolous. We had thought this question frivolous and not worth discussing. But this avenue forces us to take it seriously again. If on the other hand we grant full inner life consciousness to the non-dominant hemisphere, What will be said about the other information processing subsystems posited by current theory? Is the Freudian crutch to be taken away at the expense of populating our heads quite literally with hosts of subjects of experience? Consider, for example, the striking discovery by the psycholinguists James Lackner and Merrill Garrett of what might be called an unconscious channel of sentence comprehension. In dichotic listening tests, subjects listen through earphones to two different channels and are instructed to attend to just one channel. Typically, they can paraphrase or report with accuracy what they have heard through the attended channel, but usually they can say little about what was going concomitantly in the unattended channel. Thus, if the unattended channel carries a spoken sentence, the subjects typically can report they heard a voice or even a male or a female voice. Perhaps they have a conviction about whether the voice was speaking in their native tongue, but they cannot report what was said. In Lackney and Garrett's experimental, subjects heard ambiguous sentences in the attended channel, such as he put out the lantern to signal the attack. Simultaneously, in the unattended channel, one group of subjects received the sentence that suggested the interpretation of the sentence in the attended channel. He extinguished the lantern, while another group had a neutral or irrelevant sentence as input. Whew. In part one, okay, yeah. In part one, the exploration begins with some swift forays into the territory, noting a few striking landmarks but mounting no campaigns. In part two, our target, the mind's eye, is surveyed from the outside. What is it that reveals the presence of other minds, other souls to the searcher? Part 3 examines the physical foundation in biology of the mind, and then from this foundation moves up several levels of complexity to the level of internal representations. The mind begins to emerge as a self-designing system of representations physically embodied in the brain. Here we encounter our first roadblock, the story of a brain. We suggest some paths around it, and in part 4 we explore the implications of the emerging views of the mind as a software or program, as an abstract sort of thing whose identity is independent of any particular physical embodiment. This opens up delightful prospects such as various technologies for the transmigration of souls and the fountains of youth, but it also opens up Pandora's box of traditional metaphysical problems in untraditional costumes which are confronted in part 5. Reality itself is challenged by various rivals: dreams, fictions, simulations, illusions, free will. Illusions. Free will, something no self-respecting mind would be caught without, is put under an unusual spotlight. In minds, brains, and programs, we encounter our second roadblock, but learn from it how to press on. In part 6, past our third roadblock, what it is like to be a bat, into the inner sanctum where our mind's eye view affords us the most intimate perspectives on our target and allows us to relocate ourselves in the metaphysical and physical world. A guide to further expeditions is provided in the last section. DCD. What is DCD? Daniel C. Dennett. Man, this was such a good book, such an intriguing and enlightening book. Let's see how the other ones go. Let's just get a sense of how big the other chapters are. Oh man. Uh-oh. I think I might have to get the book because this blog is missing some. Yeah, this blog is missing some chapters. Anyway, I'll do that in the meantime, and we'll be back with the next part of reading The Mind's Eye by Douglas R. Hofstadter and Daniel C. Dennett. This was an amazing time. Totally worth